I'm Melissa DelVecchio. I'm a partner at Robert and Stern Architects, and I'm here today to bring you segment 2 of Conversations at RAMSA. My guest is Michael Kaiser. Michael is currently the chairman of the DeVos Institute for Arts Management at the University of Maryland. Michael has also served as the president of the Kennedy Center, as the executive director of the Royal Opera in London, the American Ballet Theatre, and the Alvin Dance Company. He's a sought-after consultant across the world. We are working together currently on the Schwarzman Center at Yale, which is a space that will bring arts and performance to the heart of the university's mission, and on a daily basis serve as the university's first ever campus center. So I'm anxious to hear what Michael can tell us today about how arts organizations are weathering the current pandemic. So Michael, maybe to start off, broadly speaking, you can just tell us how the pandemic has been affecting the arts. We've heard you've been working with many organizations over this period, and we're curious what you're learning and if anything has surprised you.
Thanks so much, Missy. The pandemic has had a huge impact on arts organizations because from one day to the next, all of what's called earned income disappeared. Arts organizations get two major forms of income. One is the earned income, the money they get from ticket sales, from tour fees, from classes they might give, and the other is from contributions. And while there's no normal percentage of one versus the other, roughly half of one's income will usually come from earned income. And in the middle of March, from one day to the next, all earned income was canceled.
I'm wondering if anything is in particular different about museums versus performing arts organizations.
They've both been hard hit, and each institution is different from the next. Some museums have big endowment funds that helps produce income even during pandemic. Many museums are free, so their earned income base is very low. They've been the least affected. They may have had to close for a while, but they've been the least affected financially. Performing arts organizations will be the last to recover because even a museum can let people in a socially distanced way and have some return to a visitorship, some return to some income. Whereas most performing arts organizations just simply can't afford to perform.
This is such an unusual moment. How are you drawing on those past experiences in the way you're helping these different organizations and the advice that you're giving?
I have to say this is different from anything I've experienced. We've had recessions. We had the 2008-9 recession that, as you mentioned earlier, we had to do an awful lot to help organizations get through. But now we're facing this uncertain ending, and we're facing a complete cessation of activity. We've never had that before for any length of time. We had 9/11, where on 9/11, everyone stopped. But that didn't mean we had to stop for months and months and months. And so this is new. So we are learning. And in order to learn, we decided to offer any arts organization in America that wanted some help, 1 free hour of consulting help over these last several months. And we've done 431 of these consultations. And we hope we were very helpful to the many organizations we talked with, but also we learned a great deal about how different organizations were being affected, how they were compensating for this problem, what creative ideas do they have for the fall.
So that, interestingly, was my very next question, thinking that these organizations would have to really get creative in order to weather this storm, and wondering if you could share a little bit about some of the creative things that they're doing, and even whether you think maybe some of that creativity might lead to new and different kinds of art forms.
I'll answer in reverse order. Absolutely, we're going to have creativity. We're going to have a whole Zoom type of entertainment. It's been worked on. People are trying things. They're experimenting now. Some things work well. Some things aren't so interesting. But I believe there will be some new art form that develops from this, and new ways of working on the arts that will develop from this. But also arts organizations are being very creative in the way they're handling the pandemic. One of the biggest issues when you are totally reliant on contributed income, how do you keep your donors interested if you can't have them together in a theater or a museum?
Mhm.
And so, for example, the Baltimore Symphony is doing weekly donor lounges online where their donors can come together. There's members of the orchestra present to talk and to be social. But what this experience really reflects is how many people embrace the arts because of its social nature, because they get together with others. And so having an online donor lounge, I think, is a great way of handling this. Other orchestras or performing arts organizations are looking at drive-in movie theaters as ways to have socially distanced audiences.
Mhm.
So if you can do a performance, either one that's already in the can that you've already filmed, or one that's new but socially distanced and safe, you can broadcast to a drive-in movie and have people in their cars watch the performance and participate. So I think we've seen some of that, and we'll see more of that. There's a lot of experimentation that's happening now with outdoor performances, again, where you can keep people socially distanced. There's some plays that are being written now for Zoom so that we can actually have new work that's being created for Zoom, also new dances. The Alvin Ailey company took one of their major pieces, Revelations, and they had every dancer dance a section in their home, and then they edited together. So you had the ballet. It's not exactly as you would see it in a theater, but it's such an iconic work that many people know it so well that they could imagine it as they saw the dancers dance their sections from their homes. So there's a whole range of creativity that's being brought to bear. We are in a creative field in the arts. We better be creative.
So let's talk about those staff issues and even artist issues. I know in 2008, architecture lost many, many people to different professions because there were just no jobs for these students when they came out. And we as a profession are still very much suffering from that loss, and very much hoping that this pandemic doesn't cause that to happen again. Do you worry about a bit that there might be a sort of lost generation of creativity and artists? And on the management side, maybe that some of those talented managers who've been around for a while, who are the exact people who can pull these organizations out of this difficult period, are being furloughed?
There are many great people being furloughed, but people who work in the arts are so passionate about their field, I think they'll be back as soon as they can. I'm more worried about that we're training audiences to expect art for free and to expect art wherever and whenever they want. That's been happening anyway with the shift to digital for art. But now we're really heightening that trend and accelerating it. And now people may not feel like they want to go to a theater on a date at a time to see a show when they're so used to sitting in their living room at 11 at night and binge watching Game of Thrones.
So let's talk about space a little bit, because I know you've been involved with many renovation projects. We're working together now. I know you led a major renovation and expansion at the Kennedy Center and also at the Royal Opera House, I think. So what would be your advice for architects and their clients about how space design for performance spaces might actually change in the future?
The easy one to say is that we really have to build digital into every building. We have to be able to film, we have to be able to edit. That's just going to be a given going forward. It's been there before the pandemic. The pandemic, as I said, is accelerating it, but absolutely we need to build digital into our capability. I'm not one who believes that a year or two after the pandemic, after we have a vaccine for the pandemic, that people are going to stay away from theaters because they're afraid. There are many people who think that. I don't believe that. I believe people will find it in their own personal interest to go back, and if they loved going to the symphony or the ballet or the opera, they're going to come back. So I don't think the theater has to look different so much for the future. There are people who think they do, and there are people who think that we need to design theaters to be socially distanced. I don't see how we do that and maintain an affordable product.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in the first segment that we did for this series, there was a lot of talk. It was about campuses and how they're dealing with the pandemic, and a lot of talk about how some of the trends that we're seeing now are just accelerated things that we predicted were happening or that were slowly happening before. Are there other sort of accelerated things that you've been watching as a emerging trend or as something to look out for years that now has all of a sudden become urgent?
Well, I don't think we can ignore the anti-racism movement as a major factor in our whole society, but also one that has huge resonance in the arts. We in the arts are being challenged appropriately to address equity, diversity, and inclusion in the work we do, in the staffing we have, in the boards we have. And I think I believe if you look into the future, this was going to have more of a lasting impact on the arts than COVID will, that we're going to spend more time appropriately and make more dramatic change appropriately because of this movement.
Yeah, there's big pressure on the architecture profession as well, because our statistics are actually so low in terms of, minorities in the profession. I think actually they're the same as classical music and dance. Is there anything, what have you been doing over the course of your career in these various positions, and what are you doing now? And is there anything that architects can learn from these other arts that might help them bring more diversity and equity to their own profession?
Having run the Alvin Ailey company in the early 1990s, which is an African-American dance company, I got very much involved with diversity in the arts 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And I've been working very steadily to train arts leaders of color. I ran a fellowship program at the Kennedy Center. I now run it through my institute. It's now in its 20th year. Every year, it's a very important part of our selection process is to make sure that we're bringing the best young arts managers of color to make sure that we're training a generation of leadership that can run organizations of color or can run white organizations. It's irrelevant. But I've been extremely involved in that activity. And then about 40% of my consulting every year is to organizations of color, because I believe that in addition to the moral issues, we can say as people interested in the arts that the remarkable quilt of art we have in this country depends on so many different strands of people with different backgrounds, expertise, creativity, and vision. And we cannot let portions of that quilt disappear.
I have to say, it shows, even in my limited interactions with you, I've just noticed the kind of encyclopedic knowledge that you have of all these very diverse arts organizations across the country, large and small, everything right down to street art, which you try to bring, elevate and bring to new audiences. Do you think that possibly some of this digital transmission of art might actually make some of the arts that have previously seemed inaccessible to minority groups sort of more comfortable for them to be a part of, or that people who previously thought, well, that's not really for me, might change their mind by having some of this content delivered in a different way?
I think there are many people who feel art isn't for them. I don't think it depends on race. I think a lot of it depends on economics. Our ticket pricing for the arts has accelerated more quickly than the rate of inflation in general. We raised our ticket prices to balance our budgets year in, year out for the last 40 years. And as a result, we have priced so many people out of the market who start to think arts aren't for them. I don't think that's a racial matter. I think that's just an economic issue that is felt across the spectrum of our population. In addition, as we eliminated arts from our public school education, we stopped educating so many young people about what the arts are and allowed them to experience the joy and the vitality and what makes it so great to participate. As a result, many young people don't know that the arts are for them. I think there's an educational task that's required of us in the arts that crosses the entire population, the entire spectrum of the people who live in this country, if we're going to have a vibrant arts ecology for years to come.
Is there anything in closing that I haven't asked you about that you think that I should have?
I think the most important thing to say is that mankind has always had a need to create, to make beauty, to entertain, and to be entertained. And so all of these problems we're talking about, which are dire and are problematic, are not going to result in the end of art. It's going to affect the ability of certain institutions to produce. It's going to affect the way people see the art, but it's not going to change the fact that we're going to have robust creative activity in this country forever, because that is what people want and need in a healthy society.
And that's what we look forward to returning to when this crazy period ends. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Michael. This has been an incredibly engaging conversation covering so many different topics that touch on architecture and the arts and everything that's happening right now. We really appreciate your participating in this series. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Missy.